You check your phone. Not because you received a notification. You didn't. You check it because you sent a message 40 minutes ago, and they haven't replied. Somewhere between rational and unhinged, your mind has already come up with 3 different explanations, and none of them are good. You put it face down. You pick it up again. You put it down. You know what you're doing. You're doing it anyway. The worst part, the part that really stings, isn't that you're spiraling. It's who you're spiraling about. This is someone you trust. Someone who has never once given you a reason to doubt. And still here you are, in the kitchen at 9:47 on a Tuesday, repeating the same ritual you swore you'd outgrow and making a monster out of a message that hasn't arrived. There's a name for what just happened inside you, and it has almost nothing to do with them. Here's what nobody tells you about how you love people. You didn't choose this. The reaching, the pulling back, the way you disappear exactly when something good is beginning, the way you hold on tighter the closer someone gets to leaving, or the way you somehow engineer the departure just to prove that you were right about it coming. None of that is personality. None of that is fate. It's a pattern. And patterns have roots that go deeper than you think. Long before you understood love, long before rejection was a word you knew, before you grasped what it meant to be left, your nervous system was already learning. Whether the world was safe, whether people returned, whether your needs were reasonable or burdensome, whether closeness was a place you could rest, or somewhere you had to perform to stay in. You learned these things the way children learn everything, through repetition, through the specific responses you received from those who made up your entire world. What you built from those experiences is something researchers call an internal working model, a blueprint, a subconscious set of rules about how relationships work, how much you deserve, how dangerous it is when someone pulls away, and how suspicious you should be when someone gets close. You built it before you had words. You've been running it ever since. Think of it as the operating system beneath everything else. You can update your habits, read every book, learn all the right language, and still, the OS keeps running, quietly, invisibly, until something, a slow text reply, a slightly colder tone, a partner who is just a little more unavailable than yesterday triggers it, and then you're not in the kitchen anymore. You're somewhere much earlier, and the feelings are enormous. And you can't explain why a 40-minute silence has your whole body braced. That's attachment. That's what we're actually talking about when we talk about why you love the way you do. You respond quickly, not because you're anxious. You're not anxious. You're just considerate. But because the silence after sending a message feels full of possibility, and you'd rather break it than sit in it. When a friend cancels plans, you say it's fine, and mean it, maybe half the time. When your partner goes quiet, you ask what's wrong, and when they say nothing, you ask again in a different way, as if a change in phrasing might reveal a different answer. You apologize often, sometimes preemptively, for things that haven't happened yet. You rehearse difficult conversations in the shower, then avoid having them because the imagined version went better than the real one might. You notice the exact moment the energy in a room shifts, and your body moves to fix it before your mind has fully registered the change. There is a low, persistent hum of effort. Trying not to rock the boat, not to be too much, and not to let silence linger long enough for someone to fill it with the conclusion you fear. Beneath all of this is an old belief you've forgotten you hold. That love is conditional, that your value in a relationship must constantly be earned, and that even the slightest sign of someone pulling away, however unclear, is an early warning system you should heed. What research traces to the root of this isn't neediness, it's an inconsistency. At some early point, the connection you needed was sometimes available and sometimes absent, with no reliable pattern to recognize. Your nervous system responded by intensifying its efforts, scanning harder, reaching louder, making sure you'd have enough warning to brace yourself. The wound isn't that you need too much. It's that you once needed a predictable thing and got an unpredictable one, and you've been trying to make up for that gap ever since. They were wonderful at first, present, warm, the kind of person who made you feel truly seen. Then, at some unnoticed moment, something shifted. They became busier. They needed more space. Emotional conversations turned into a careful, measured neutrality, not hostility, not distance exactly, but more like a door closing so slowly you couldn't point to the exact second. They didn't leave. They didn't do anything wrong outright. They just receded, and if you mentioned it, they'd say you were imagining things. If you pushed, they'd say you were pushing. They are remarkably good at being alone. They describe themselves as independent, private, and someone who processes internally. They believe this. From the outside, it looks like self-sufficiency, the emotional stability everyone aims for. But independence isn't neutral. The distance isn't a choice. It's a structure built for a reason. Avoidant attachment doesn't come from indifference. It comes from a specific kind of learning, that expressing emotional need makes things worse, not better. Maybe the people they relied on were dismissive, overwhelmed, or loved freely until it became inconvenient. Like when a child is too loud, too sad, or too emotionally costly. So, the nervous system adapted. Don't show need, contain it. Become someone whose inner life takes up as little space as possible, hoping the connection will hold. The core wound of avoidant attachment isn't coldness. It's the belief that being truly known will cost you the person knowing you. That the full, unfiltered version uncertain, vulnerable, occasionally wanting to be held without asking, would be the end of the relationship. And historically, that's often been true. What do you do with a need you were never allowed to have? You learn to ignore it. You become very skilled at it. Until someone tries to love you, and the distance you've built starts to seem, from the inside, like evidence of how little you need, and from the outside, like a wall. Here's something the research shows and almost no one talks about. These patterns aren't randomly distributed across relationships. The anxious person and the avoidant person find each other with an accuracy that would be impressive if it weren't so reliably painful. It makes a terrible kind of sense. The avoidant person's distance feels, to the anxious person, like the unpredictability they learned to chase. Familiar, activating, just out of reach enough to make the reaching feel necessary. The anxious person's pursuit feels, to the avoidant person, like confirmation of their worst fear. That intimacy means being consumed. That closeness costs you yourself. So the anxious person works harder. The avoidant person recedes further. Neither is wrong, exactly. Both are running the oldest code they have. The cycle doesn't break because one person becomes patient enough or brave enough. It breaks when it does, because both people get curious about the code. The anxious person starts asking not just why they won't come closer, but why their distance feels like it's about me. And the avoidant person begins to ask not just why they can't give me space, but what I am actually protecting in here. Those are not comfortable questions. They're the right ones. It starts with the specific electric feeling of someone who might finally get it. You move fast. You feel in weeks what other people describe feeling after years. The warmth is real. The hope is real. And then something happens. Sometimes it's something real. A broken plan, a careless comment, a moment where they weren't there the way you needed. Sometimes it's nothing you can name, a shift in energy, a slight cooling, something only you noticed but your whole body registered. And suddenly the person who felt safe feels like a threat. You don't go quiet. You don't reach louder. You do something stranger. You pick a fight that didn't need to happen. You say something precise and targeted, designed to create the distance you're terrified of, because at least if you drive it, it's not a surprise. And then almost immediately, sometimes before the words have even landed, you miss them. You want to take it back. And the reaching starts again. People who exhibit this pattern are often accused of being contradictory, exhausting, and overwhelming. They are not. They are someone operating a system without a clear strategy because their original situation did not allow for one. Anxious attachment has a strategy. Reach out more loudly. Avoidant attachment has a strategy. Need less. Disorganized attachment, sometimes called fearful avoidant, has neither, because the part of the nervous system that seeks safety and the part that detects danger are directed at the same target. The person trying to love you, consider what that truly means. Early on, the place where you were supposed to feel safest was also where your fear resided. The caregiver was both a comfort and a threat. The love was genuine. The unpredictability was real. And your nervous system had to hold both at once, with no way to resolve them, during a time when it's still being developed. The adult who carries this pattern isn't unstable. They aren't difficult to love. They are someone for whom intimacy itself became the signal that something was about to go wrong, not because they chose this, but because they experienced it repeatedly before they were old enough to question it. A new relationship, like a Tuesday morning when everything seems fine, can feel like standing in a room where the walls haven't moved yet, but you remember that they do. Imagine sitting across from someone you love, about to have a tough conversation, and your first feeling isn't dread. It's more like, this will probably be uncomfortable but likely okay. Imagine receiving a cold text from a friend, and your first instinct is curiosity. I wonder what's going on with them, rather than jumping to conclusions. I wonder what I did. Imagine a relationship ending, truly hurting, without the pain becoming proof that you were always destined for this, that the people you love always leave, or that something inside you invites it. Imagine reaching out to someone, and it not feeling like a risk, not because you're sure they'll reach back, but because being reached for in return is something you've experienced enough times to think it might happen again. Ordinary, even. This is secure attachment. And if it sounds like a low standard, just ordinary, just probably okay, it's because we often underestimate how much energy insecure patterns require. Something secure attachment doesn't have to worry about. The anxious person uses huge amounts of energy scanning for warning signs. The avoidant person spends a lot of time maintaining distance. The disorganized person expends enormous effort managing a nervous system that can't decide whether love is rescue or danger. Secure attachment doesn't drain those resources, freeing up a surprising amount of capacity to be truly present in a relationship, rather than managing it from inside a bunker. Research shows, and this is important, that securely attached adults don't have painless histories. They aren't people who have experienced nothing bad. They are people who could make sense of what happened. Their stories make sense. There is a clear connection between cause and effect that they can follow without everything going dark. That's the part nobody openly states. Security isn't about the past being perfect. It's about the past being understandable. And understanding, unlike the past itself, can change. Here's what makes these patterns so hard to navigate. They don't really seem like patterns at all. They feel like you. The anxious person doesn't see themselves as hypervigilant. They see themselves as someone who cares deeply, pays attention, and shows up. The avoidant person doesn't see themselves as defended. They see themselves as stable, self-sufficient, not someone who falls apart over issues others seem to fall apart over. The disorganized person doesn't see themselves as conflicted. They see themselves as briefly, finally, whole when they find someone who matches their feelings, and shockingly shattered when that person gets close enough to be real. The burden isn't just the behavior. The burden is the conclusion that the behavior is you, that you are inherently too much, or fundamentally closed off, or wired to want the things that harm you. That conclusion isn't true. It's a decision a child makes based on incomplete data, in conditions of complete dependence, with no other options. It was the smartest response to the situation, given how the situation actually was. So the question isn't what's wrong with the way you love. The question is, what has loving once cost you? Not as something to carry forever, but as a real alternative to the story that this is simply your nature. Because if it's your nature, you're stuck with it. But if it's something you learned, something that made sense in the context where you learned it, and has been running on its original settings ever since, then your relationship to it can change. Not the pattern itself, not immediately, but the difference between being caught off guard by a reaction you don't understand, and recognizing a familiar piece of old code, and knowing, even while it's running, that it's not the same situation that created it. That slight shift, from this is who I am to this is what I learned, is where everything else begins to open up. The people who love you aren't confused by your pattern. They're waiting, probably without even realizing it, for you to be less confused by it than they are. That's it. That's the whole story. You can stay in the kitchen, phone in hand, turning silence into catastrophe. Or you can put the phone down not because you've stopped caring, but because you're beginning to recognize the feeling, the specific texture of old fear arriving in a present moment where it doesn't belong, and you finally understand what it is. Not a verdict. A memory. one that you no longer have to mistake for the news.